It is February 6, 1952. The house at Sandringham lies in silence. You push open a bedroom door, and the air is heavy, stale, suffused with the faint odor of extinguished cigarettes that never seem to leave his breath. On the bed lies the body of a king, George VI, only 56, his face pale, lips tinged with blue, chest still beneath the sheets. The man who had stood against Hitler's bombs, who had steadied his people through war, now lies motionless in a quiet Norfolk room. His arteries, worn from years of strain, and his lungs, scarred by smoke, had finally betrayed him. The bedside clock reads 7:30 a.m. The monarch has slipped away in his sleep, leaving an empire stunned, and a daughter about to become queen far sooner than expected. If what you are hearing feels unsettling, if it pulls you deeper into the shadows of history, then let this not be the last time. Subscribe to this channel, not for comfort, but for remembrance. Like this video only if the story holds weight for you, and share it if you believe others should witness what lies behind royal doors. We don't chase spectacle, we uncover truth that has been buried. You stand in Britain at the beginning of the 1950s. The war is over, but its scars are everywhere. Streets still bear the wounds of bombing raids. Families still whisper about rationing, grief, and loss. The empire, once the largest in history, is shrinking. India has already gone, and other territories are slipping away. Britain is no longer the master of half the world, but a tired nation limping into an uncertain age. And yet, the crown remains. At its head is a reluctant king. George VI was never meant to rule. You remember the abdication crisis of 1936, when his elder brother, Edward VIII, chose love over duty, abandoning the throne for Wallace Simpson. The burden fell to George, a man shy, plagued by a stammer, never groomed for such weight. But history rarely waits for the prepared. When war came, you watched him transform, night after night. His voice, hesitant, halting, but unwavering, was broadcast into homes as London burned. He visited bombed-out streets, walking among rubble and ash, shaking hands with soot-covered men and women. For his people, he became a symbol of endurance, a quiet man shouldering a crown of iron. Winston Churchill himself praised the king's steady presence, the way he bound the nation together. To millions, he was not glamorous, but he was trusted. But every step, every broadcast, carried a private cost. George VI smoked compulsively, often a pack a day, sometimes more. He carried his nerves in his chest, drawing smoke to calm his stammer, to silence his fears. Doctors warned him. Friends noticed the cough that never left him. You remember how the king's skin grew pale, his frame thinner. Behind the pageantry of royal duties was a man slowly consumed by his own habits. By 1949, his health faltered. You stood with the court physicians as they whispered the diagnosis: arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. His body was aging faster than his years. The king underwent surgery to cut off part of his lung, scarred by decades of tobacco. Newspapers reported he was recovering, but you saw the truth in his hollow eyes, the strain as he tried to walk across a room. Every public appearance became a test of endurance. And yet, he continued, even as pain carved itself into his body. He forced himself into uniform, carried out ceremonies, stood before the people. The crown demanded presence, and he gave what he had left. But with each month, his strength dwindled. In 1951, you watched him stand beside Prime Minister Winston Churchill, frail yet still king. His voice grew softer, his posture weaker, and then, the diagnosis none wanted to speak aloud: lung cancer. A disease that, in that era, carried no mercy. Doctors removed his entire left lung, but the damage was already written in his body. He tried to recover, even resumed light duties, but the shadow of mortality hung heavy. By early 1952, you see a man only a shadow of the figure who once steadied a nation through war. George VI retreats to Sandringham, his private estate, to rest. He greets his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, who prepares to depart for a royal tour of Kenya. Their farewell is brief, yet filled with a heaviness that you, standing silently by, cannot ignore. It would be the last time she would see her father alive. That is the stage upon which you now stand. A nation rebuilding, an empire unraveling, a king consumed by illness. And in a quiet bedroom in Norfolk, history prepares to turn its page. You are in Norfolk, winter of 1952. The Sandringham estate is wrapped in frost, its fields white beneath a low February sky. The grand house, familiar to generations of royals, holds a strange stillness. It is both home and mausoleum in waiting, though no one yet dares to say it aloud. You move through its corridors, where fireplaces struggle against the cold, and heavy curtains are drawn to keep the drafts at bay. This is where George VI has chosen to spend his final weeks, though neither he nor those closest to him have spoken of it so plainly. The king's health has been deteriorating for years, but here it is impossible to ignore. Each morning, you see him rise with difficulty. His once solid frame has diminished, reduced by illness to something fragile. His face, though still marked by the familiar jaw and steady eyes of the House of Windsor, now carries the deep lines of a man decades older than his 56 years. His skin is sallow, his breathing is shallow. Every movement seems to cost him dearly. Doctors come and go quietly through the estate. They prescribe rest, fresh air, and careful monitoring. Yet you know, as they do, that rest alone cannot repair the damage done by years of chain smoking and by the surgery that removed his left lung only months before. The scars have not healed. The exhaustion has not lifted. His arteries are stiff, his heart burdened. In the medical notes, the words arteriosclerosis and carcinoma appear like shadows that will not leave. Still, George insists on small routines. He dresses in a suit each day, though the effort leaves him breathless. He greets staff with polite nods. He reads government papers by the fire, his hand occasionally trembling as he signs his name. He still smokes, though less than before, and the smoke lingers in the rooms long after he has finished. When he steps outside, wrapped in heavy coat and scarf, the cold air catches in his chest, and he coughs, a sound sharp enough to draw glances from those who accompany him. On February 5th, he seems slightly improved. You note how he smiles faintly at breakfast, how he takes a short walk in the gardens despite the winter chill. Princess Elizabeth is far away now, in Kenya, beginning her royal tour, unaware that her father's reprieve is only a cruel illusion. The king returns indoors, sits with papers in his study, and later retires earlier than usual. Those around him breathe easier, as though the worst has passed. But you, standing near, feel the weight of something inevitable pressing closer. The night stretches long. In the early hours of February 6th, the house is silent except for the ticking of clocks and the occasional creak of wood as the old house settles in the cold. In his bedroom, George VI lies beneath heavy covers. His breathing grows irregular, shallow, uneven. There are no cries, no gasps of pain, only the quiet fading of a man whose body has reached its end. Sometime between midnight and dawn, his pulse weakens. At 7:30 a.m., the King of the United Kingdom is found lifeless in his bed, his face serene, as though simply asleep. The discovery is both sudden and unsurprising. The valet who enters is struck by the stillness, by the unnatural silence in the room. You notice the absence first, the missing sound of breath. The curtains are partly drawn, letting in the pale light of morning that falls across his face. His skin has cooled, his features softened by death. No violent struggle, no twisted agony, just the still, final truth. A doctor is summoned, but the verdict is immediate: coronary thrombosis. His heart, weakened and overworked, has stopped. The room quickly fills with whispers, footsteps, the shifting weight of grief. A monarch has died, and with him the steadying presence that carried Britain through its darkest years. Yet in this private chamber, before the news spreads to the world, you feel only the intimacy of death, the smell of stale smoke clinging to the sheets, the hush that falls heavy over those who enter. The way time seems to pause around a body that only hours before held command of an empire. Protocol begins almost at once. Officials are notified. Messages are dispatched. The Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, is informed. Around the estate, staff lower their voices, moving with hushed urgency. Guards take their places. Outside, the cold February air seems sharper, as though the land itself has taken note. And in Kenya, a young woman, still Princess Elizabeth, goes to sleep unaware that she will awaken as queen. In the hours that follow, you watch as the king's body is prepared. Physicians confirm the cause of death. Courtiers manage the delicate balance of respect and efficiency. The corpse, once regal in life, is now carefully arranged, its dignity preserved even in death. His mouth is closed, his eyes shut, sheets are smooth, pillows adjusted. The pale light from the window strikes his face, highlighting the lines etched by years of burden. It is not gruesome, not dramatic, it is quiet, and perhaps that is what unsettles most. The sudden absence of power. The king who stood firm during war now lies still, powerless, a man undone by the same human frailties as those he ruled. You feel the weight of history in that room, not only the end of a reign, but the beginning of another. Outside, the machinery of monarchy stirs. The phrase, "The king is dead, long live the queen," is already being prepared. Radio announcements are drafted. Flags are readied to be lowered to half-mast. The world will soon know. But here, in Sandringham, you remain in the room of the dead king, where the air still carries the final breath of George VI. And the sheets still hold the faint impression of his form. The estate falls into mourning. Courtiers and staff move as though through water, their faces drawn. For some, memories of the war years rise unbidden, the broadcasts, the visits to bomb sites, the king's quiet courage. For others, the personal loss is sharper, the man they served, the figure they saw daily. Now gone, you stand among them, feeling both the intimacy of grief and the vastness of its implications. George VI had lived not as a grand ruler, but as a reluctant one. He had steadied the nation not with charisma, but with persistence, and now his reign ends as it had been lived, quietly, without spectacle, in service until his body gave out. His death in sleep, though peaceful in appearance, is the culmination of years of decline, of battles fought within his own flesh. By mid-morning, the news begins to spread. Telephones ring, journalists gather. Across Britain, radios carry the somber announcement: His Majesty King George VI has passed away in his sleep. The words strike like a cold wind through homes, offices, and streets. Shock mingles with sorrow. Few had expected his end so soon. At only 56, he seemed too young to be gone. Yet the truth was undeniable. His body had carried him as far as it could. You step outside the estate and see the first signs of mourning. Flags are lowered, black armbands donned. In London, bells begin to toll. Across the empire, from Canada to Australia to Africa, the news arrives, and millions pause. Some weep, some bow their heads, some stand in stunned silence. In every reaction is the same recognition: the king who had guided them through war has left them. And somewhere above the clouds, aboard a plane in Africa, Princess Elizabeth receives the message that will alter her life forever. She boarded as a daughter. She will return as a queen. You stand within the walls of Sandringham, but your mind travels outward as news of the king's passing begins its journey across Britain and the empire. The first calls are discreet, whispered into telephone receivers by officials who know the gravity of their words. Then, with the precision of long-rehearsed protocol, the announcement moves from private halls to public ears. His Majesty King George VI died peacefully in his sleep this morning. At once, the tone of a nation shifts. Radios hum to life, their warm static filling kitchens, shops, and offices. You imagine the faces of ordinary Britons, housewives pausing mid-task, clerks freezing at their desks, workers in factories standing still as the words sink in. There is shock, for though the king's illness had been reported, Few had expected the end to arrive so abruptly. He was only 56. The war had ended only 7 years earlier. He had seemed to many as a permanent fixture of the age. A voice of endurance during years of fire and ruin. Now, he was gone. In London, you watch the city react. Flags are lowered to half-mast on government buildings. At St. Paul's Cathedral, bells toll in long, slow peals, each note reverberating through streets where passers-by stop and bow their heads. Black armbands appear as if conjured overnight, worn by police, postmen, and shopkeepers. The press offices churn, printing editions with headlines that stretch across entire front pages. The king is dead. Photographs of George VI in uniform, of his weary but steady face, stare back at readers who hold the papers with trembling hands. Churchill, now Prime Minister once again after the Labour government's fall, delivers his words with visible grief. You recall how he had leaned on the king during the darkest days of 1940. When bombs rained over London and the possibility of invasion seemed imminent. He calls George VI a man of courage, a symbol of quiet strength. And though Churchill himself is famed for oratory, his voice falters. The nation recognizes not only the death of a sovereign, but the loss of the man who had stood with them against annihilation. Meanwhile, in Kenya, Princess Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, are staying at the Treetops Hotel. You see the message arrive, carried by officials who look stricken as they approach. She had been gazing at elephants below the treetop balcony only hours before, unaware that the crown had already settled upon her. The words spoken to her are blunt, but there is no gentler way to convey them. Her father is dead. She is now queen. In an instant, the life of a young woman of 25 is transformed into the life of a monarch. She will never again be only daughter, wife, or mother. She is sovereign, and the world will never look at her the same. Back in Britain, grief spreads quickly. Trains run quietly, their passengers subdued. At schools, children are gathered and told solemnly of the king's death. In pubs, men drink in silence, some remembering their war years when his broadcasts steadied them as much as Churchill's speeches. You hear fragments of conversation. Too young. Smoked himself to death. A good man. A good king. The loss is felt personally, not as an abstract shift in power, but as the absence of a figure who had been present in every household through the war. At Sandringham, the king's body is moved carefully. Courtiers and officials prepare for the transfer to London. His coffin is chosen, oak, simple but dignified. It will first rest at St. Mary Magdalene Church on the estate before beginning the slow journey to Westminster. You watch as mortuary attendants handle the body with practiced solemnity. They adjust the limbs, wrap him, and place him within the coffin. Even in death, the dignity of monarchy must be preserved, for cameras and public eyes will soon follow. When the coffin leaves Sandringham, it is greeted by a hushed crowd gathered along the route. Farmers, laborers, and villagers stand with heads bowed as the cortege passes. Horses stamp the cold ground, their breath rising in frosty plumes. You notice the stillness, broken only by the creak of wheels and the muffled rhythm of boots. To these people, the king was not distant royalty. He had been present during air raids, had walked among the bombed streets, had shared their suffering. Their silence now is heavy with respect. Arriving in London, the coffin is borne into Westminster Hall, where it will lie in state. You stand among the officials as guards take their posts. 4 sentries, motionless, surround the catafalque, their heads bowed, their hands resting on sword hilts. The air inside is cold. The great hall dimly lit by shafts of gray winter light filtering through high windows. Here, death is not hidden. The body of a king is placed before his people, draped in royal standard, crowned with wreaths. And the people come. They come in thousands, in lines that stretch along the Thames, through freezing nights and bitter winds. Men, women, and children, rich and poor alike, shuffle forward to pay respects. Some weep quietly, some cross themselves, some bow deeply, others only glance briefly before moving on. But all carry the weight of the moment. You hear the shuffle of shoes on stone. the soft rustle of coats, the occasional cough breaking the silence. It is not spectacle, it is communion between monarch and subject. One final meeting before burial. The newspapers record these scenes with reverence. Photographs capture the solemn march of mourners. The coffin bathed in shadows. Editorials describe him as the people's king, a man who had not sought power but bore it with dignity. And yet, between the lines, a darker truth is acknowledged. His death was hastened by habits long ignored. The chain-smoked cigarettes, the endless stress, the surgery that left his body too frail to recover. A monarch felled not by assassination or battlefield, but by the slow decay of his own flesh. As you stand within Westminster Hall, you cannot ignore the sensory weight of it all. The air smells faintly of wax and damp stone. The floor is cold beneath your shoes. The silence is not absolute but carries a low hum of collective grief. You look at the coffin and know that within lies the body of a man whose arteries hardened until his heart could no longer beat. It is a reminder of mortality, even for kings. Outside, the machinery of state continues its relentless pace. The phrase, "The king is dead, long live the queen," is repeated, and coronation plans begin to take shape even as mourning rituals unfold. The monarchy does not pause, but the people pause, and in their pause is a grief that feels raw, immediate, and personal. You stand in London on February 15th, 1952. The city is draped in black. Flags hang at half-mast, their fabric heavy with rain. The air is damp and cold, and mist clings to the stone facades of Westminster. On this morning, Britain gathers not in defiance of war, but in reverence for the dead body of its sovereign. George VI, the king who guided his people through fire, will be laid to rest. From dawn, the streets are lined with people. They stand shoulder to shoulder, silent in the winter chill. Some clutch umbrellas, others wear mourning bands, all united by the desire to witness the last journey of their king. You see old veterans in worn coats, women with black veils, children perched on shoulders for a glimpse. They have come not for spectacle, but for closure. Many still remember the war years, when his steady voice on the radio reminded them they were not alone. Now, they stand to return that loyalty. Inside Westminster Hall, the coffin is readied for departure. Draped in the royal standard, crowned with the imperial state crown, orb, and scepter, it rests upon a gun carriage. Guards stand rigid in ceremonial uniforms, their helmets gleaming under the dim light. The air is filled with the smell of wax and damp wool. You feel the weight of centuries in this hall, where kings and queens have lain before him. Now, George VI joins that solemn lineage. At precisely 9:30 a.m., the coffin is lifted. The sound of boots on stone echoes as the Grenadier Guards take their burden. The great doors of Westminster swing open, and the coffin emerges into the grey morning. A hush falls over the crowd, so complete that you hear the creak of the carriage wheels as it begins to roll. Ahead march pipers, their mournful notes drifting through the air. The sound is haunting, carried by the mist, as though the city itself is keening. The procession moves slowly through London. You walk with it, step for step, hearing the muffled drums that beat like a funeral heart. Behind the carriage walk the royal family, Queen Elizabeth, now a widow, her black veil concealing grief, the young Queen Elizabeth II. Her face set in stoic sorrow, Prince Philip at her side, steadying her as history presses its weight upon her shoulders. Winston Churchill follows, his heavy frame bowed with age and grief. You see his eyes glisten as he gazes at the coffin. He had sparred with George VI in politics, but in war they had been bound together. Now, the Prime Minister walks in silence, every step an act of mourning. The streets are lined 10 deep. Men remove their hats, women cross themselves, children hold their breath as the coffin passes. From rooftops and balconies, faces peer down, solemn and pale. The silence is extraordinary. In a city of millions, the only sounds are drums, pipes, and hooves striking pavement. It is as though London itself has stopped breathing. The procession reaches Paddington Station, where a train waits. The coffin is transferred with care, the guards lifting and lowering in perfect synchronization. The train, draped in black, will carry the king's body to Windsor, where his final resting place awaits. As the locomotive exhales steam, you smell coal and iron mingling with the scent of fresh wreaths. Crowds watch in silence as the train pulls away, its whistle low and mournful. At Windsor, the scene repeats. The coffin is borne from the train, placed once again upon a gun carriage, and drawn towards St. George's Chapel. You walk the familiar stone paths of Windsor Castle, where monarchs have lived and died for centuries. The chapel looms, Gothic and solemn, its spires piercing the gray sky. Inside, candles flicker, casting golden light upon dark wood and stone. The smell of incense lingers, sharp and sweet. The service begins. The Archbishop of Canterbury intones the prayers, his voice echoing through the vaulted space. Psalms are sung, their notes rising and falling like waves of grief. You see the royal family seated in the front rows, their faces veiled but their sorrow unmistakable. The young queen holds her composure, but you sense the enormity of what she bears, the loss of a father, the sudden inheritance of a crown. The coffin rests at the center of the chapel, surrounded by guards in ceremonial stillness. Wreaths of lilies, roses, and carnations fill the air with fragrance, mingling with the cold stone scent of the chapel. Each flower is a symbol, each petal a gesture of mourning. As the service ends, the coffin is lowered into the royal vault beneath the chapel. You hear the ropes strain, the sound of wood descending into the darkness. The thud as it reaches its resting place reverberates through the chamber. Final and absolute, dust stirs, and the air feels heavier. The king is gone, entombed among his ancestors. There is no applause, no cheer, only silence. Heads bow, eyes close. Some weep openly. You feel the finality settle upon the room like a weight. The man who never sought the crown, who bore it nonetheless, has been carried into eternity. Outside, the crowds remain, even though the service is closed to them. They wait, standing in solemn ranks, until the bells toll the end. Then slowly, they disperse, each carrying with them the memory of this day. The image of a coffin draped in royal colors. The echo of drums fading into distance. For days after, Britain remains subdued. Shops play no music. Theaters cancel performances. Newspapers are filled with photographs of mourning. Across the empire, from Canada to Australia, services are held in his memory. The grief is genuine, cutting across class and rank. George VI had not been a flamboyant king, but he had been steady, and in steadiness the people had found comfort. And now, the world begins to adjust. Queen Elizabeth II ascends the throne, the beginning of a new era. But you, standing at the edge of the grave in Windsor, cannot help but feel the shadows of what has ended. The war years, the unity, the courage in the face of bombs, all seem to close with him. His death is not only the end of a reign but the closing of a chapter in Britain's identity. You look once more at St. George's Chapel, its doors closed now upon the royal vault. Inside, beneath layers of stone and centuries of history, lies a man who bore his burdens until his body failed him. He is gone, yet the silence of his passing lingers in every stone, every flag, every bowed head. You are no longer in the chapel or the funeral procession. Instead, you stand beside physicians' notes, hospital corridors, and medical reports that tell a quieter, but no less revealing, story of George VI's final years. Behind the solemn rituals of monarchy lies the unembellished reality, a body pushed beyond its limits by habit, stress, and disease. From the earliest days of his reign, George VI leaned on cigarettes as both crutch and companion. You recall how he lit one after another, sometimes as many as 60 a day. Doctors of the time knew of the dangers, though the full picture of tobacco's destruction had not yet entered public awareness. The king's voice was already unsteady with stammer, his nerves stretched taut by unexpected kingship, and nicotine became his chosen balm. But each inhalation carried tar and poison deeper into his lungs. Each year carved new damage. By 1948, the consequences became impossible to ignore. You watch as George tires easily. His breathing labored. Physicians note signs of peripheral vascular disease. The arteries in his legs stiffening. Blood flow compromised. The man who once walked London's bombed streets now struggles with the simple act of climbing stairs. The diagnosis of arteriosclerosis follows: hardening of the arteries. A relentless narrowing that starves the heart and brain. It is a disease without mercy. And it shadows him constantly. In September 1951, the blow falls. X-rays reveal a malignant tumor in his left lung. You stand in the operating theater at Buckingham Palace as surgeons prepare. It is an extraordinary moment. Royal flesh laid bare under harsh light. Scalpels ready to carve where no common eye may see. The operation is performed by Sir Clement Price Thomas, one of the era's foremost thoracic surgeons. With precision, the left lung is removed in its entirety. The operation is successful in technical terms. But the king's body is left weakened. His capacity for oxygen reduced forever. You can almost hear the hiss of air leaving his chest. The sound of tissue torn away. Recovery is slow and incomplete. You watch as George VI struggles to walk. His once solid stride replaced by hesitant steps. His complexion grows pale. His hands tremble. Courtiers speak of recovery, but privately they see the truth. Their sovereign is failing. Even simple duties leave him exhausted. The scar from his surgery aches. His body has begun the slow march toward collapse. Doctors note additional complications: coronary thrombosis, the sudden clotting of blood in arteries feeding the heart, combined with arterial disease and reduced lung function. It is a lethal combination. Every cigarette, every sleepless night of stress, has conspired toward this end. Medical science in the early 1950s could offer little. Chemotherapy was experimental, radiotherapy crude, and lung cancer a near-certain death sentence. The king's only option was surgery, and though skillfully performed, it bought him only months. Today, you understand the grim arithmetic. 5-year survival rates for lung cancer were almost non-existent then. George VI was a doomed man from the moment the tumor was discovered. Yet, in public, he persevered. You see him in photographs, pale but smiling faintly as he greets Prime Minister Churchill, or standing with Princess Elizabeth before her departure to Kenya. His suit conceals the hollowness of his frame. His posture masks the effort each breath requires. He insists on appearing as king, though behind the facade, his organs are failing. On February 5, 1952, doctors visit him at Sandringham. They note improvement, remarking that he looks better than in weeks. He even manages to walk outdoors, breathing the sharp Norfolk air. But you, with hindsight, see the cruel irony. The body sometimes rallies before collapse, as though giving one final spark before extinguishing entirely. That night, he retires earlier than usual, his family reassured. By morning, his heart has failed, the arteries too blocked, the muscle too starved of blood. Coronary thrombosis claims him as he sleeps. You enter the bedroom again, but now with the eyes of medicine. His lips are cyanotic, bluish from lack of oxygen. His skin is pale, the cooling of death already begun. There is no violent distortion, only the quiet posture of sleep. Forensic detail confirms the cause: a blood clot formed in his coronary artery, cutting off blood to the heart muscle. Without circulation, the heart stopped within minutes. Death was swift, silent, final. In the days that follow, autopsy is not performed, the dignity of kingship sparing him that indignity. But the diagnosis stands unquestioned: lung cancer, arteriosclerosis, coronary thrombosis, the trifecta of smoking's toll. His body became a map of disease, each organ bearing scars of habit and heredity. The press, though respectful, acknowledges hints of this truth. Some editorials mention his heavy smoking. Others hint at the strain of kingship. To the public, he died peacefully. To physicians, he died inevitably. As you stand amid these records, you sense the contrast. The rituals of monarchy cloak his death in grandeur: coffins, crowns, ceremonies, yet stripped to its essence. The story is human, painfully so. George VI died not of mystery, nor assassination, but of the same diseases that claim millions. He was not spared by wealth or crown. He was undone by arteries that hardened and lungs that blackened, by a body that could no longer sustain the demands placed upon it. And in this, there is something profoundly unsettling. Kings are meant to stand above, to appear untouchable, yet here, you confront the frailty that crowns cannot disguise. You smell the stale tobacco on his clothing, picture the yellowing of his fingers from smoke, hear the cough that echoed in palace halls. You realize the man revered for his wartime courage was, in private, a victim of the same vices as countless others. The medical truth strips away illusion. Behind the draped coffin and the tolling bells lies the simple reality of a man who smoked too much, worked too hard, and suffered diseases medicine could not cure. His death was majestic in ceremony, but in essence, it was ordinary, human frailty claiming a human life. And yet, that ordinariness is what binds him to his people. They grieved because he was like them, flawed and mortal. They saw in him not perfection, but perseverance, a man who endured despite weakness. And when his body failed, their mourning was not only for a king, but for the father, the husband, the man whose humanity they recognized. You are in Kenya, high in the Aberdare Range, at the Treetops Hotel. It is the evening of February 5, 1952. Princess Elizabeth, just 25 years old, smiles as she watches elephants drinking at a waterhole below the wooden balcony. She does not yet know that history is moving beneath her feet, that the life she has always known will end before dawn breaks in Britain. When the news arrives, it is carried not with ceremony but with urgency. Officials, pale and shaken, approach her and Prince Philip. You stand close enough to hear the blunt words, her father, King George VI, is dead. There is no pause, no gentle phrasing. He died in his sleep at Sandringham. The crown is now hers. She went up the tree a princess, one newspaper would later write, and she came down a queen. The moment is surreal. Elizabeth, dressed in summer clothes suited for the African heat, is suddenly monarch of an empire stretching across continents. Prince Philip steadies her, but you see in her eyes the collision of grief and duty. She is no longer daughter first. She is sovereign. The machinery of monarchy will not allow her to mourn as others do. Arrangements are made swiftly. The royal party returns to Nairobi, then prepares for the flight back to Britain. The young woman who only hours ago laughed at wildlife now carries the weight of 1,000 years of royal lineage on her shoulders. Her journey home is shadowed by silence. Every mile brings her closer to a nation in mourning, to a role she never sought so soon. In London, you watch as her aircraft lands at Heathrow on February 7th. The skies are gray, the air cold, the crowd gathered solemn. She descends the steps in black mourning clothes provided hastily along the way. Her face is pale but composed, her posture already regal. She is greeted by officials, ministers, and courtiers who bow deeply, not to the daughter of a dead king, but to their new queen. You sense the strange duality, grief bound tightly beneath protocol, personal loss overshadowed by national necessity. That evening, Elizabeth travels to Clarence House, her London residence. You see her sit in the familiar rooms, now altered by absence. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, is shrouded in black. Princess Margaret weeps quietly. Together they share their grief. But even here, the young queen is marked by her role. Officials stand by with documents. Advisors whisper of the accession council. Speeches, signatures, oaths. History does not grant her time to heal. On February 8th, she appears before the accession council at St. James's Palace. You are among those present in the crowded chamber, where statesmen and peers gather beneath portraits of monarchs long past. The room smells faintly of old wood and ink. The clerk reads the formal proclamation. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor is now Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of this realm and of her other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith. She signs her name with a steady hand. Her voice, though quiet, carries when she speaks of her father's example and her promise to serve as he had served. You sense both the weight and the inevitability of the moment. She has no choice but to accept. She is monarch, not because she desired it, but because death demanded it. Outside, the proclamation is read aloud. Heralds in bright uniforms stand in the cold air and declare the new queen to the gathered crowds. Trumpets sound, and voices cry, "God save the queen." Yet the cheer is muted. Bound by mourning, the king is dead, and while they honor his daughter, the grief of his passing still hangs over the people. In the following days, Elizabeth meets with ministers, advisors, and foreign dignitaries. You watch her navigate the labyrinth of duty, her face composed though her heart is raw with loss. At night, behind closed doors, she weeps as a daughter. By day, she reigns as queen. This duality will define her for decades to come, the private woman and the public sovereign. Forever intertwined, the press captures every step. Photographs of her arrival, her solemn signature, her black attire fill newspapers across the world. Commentators note her youth, her calm, her resemblance to her late father. Comparisons are drawn. Where George VI was reluctant, Elizabeth seems resolute. Where he was shy, she appears composed. Yet you, watching closely, know this is performance born of necessity. Inside, she is grieving, but duty has no pause. The nation responds with a mix of sorrow and reassurance. They have lost a king, but gained a queen. At 25, Elizabeth embodies continuity, a bridge from the wartime years into a new age. For many, her presence offers comfort. The monarchy endures. The words, "Long live the Queen," echo across radios, newspapers, and church pulpits. At Sandringham, the room where George VI died remains still. The sheets have been changed, the air cleared of smoke, but the memory lingers. You stand once more by the window where light fell across his lifeless face. The bed is empty now, but the weight of history remains in the silence. His death ended one reign and began another. The transition was not ceremonial, it was immediate, absolute. The contrast is sharp. A king, worn down by illness, slipping away in his sleep, a daughter, young and unprepared, thrust suddenly into history's gaze. The line between them is death itself, dividing father from daughter, man from monarch, past from future. In this moment, you realize the nature of monarchy. It is not about individual choice or readiness. It is about the unbroken chain. One sovereign dies, another ascends. Time does not pause. And you, standing at the edge of both lives, witness the hinge of history turning on a single night. You stand in the quiet after the funeral, after the proclamations, after the ceremonies that stitched a nation's grief into ritual. The crown has passed to Elizabeth II, and Britain turns toward a new age. But before history moves too quickly, you linger with the man whose body now rests in the vault at Windsor. What remains of George VI? And what does his death reveal about monarchy, mortality, and memory? To understand his legacy, you first recall the unexpected path that placed him on the throne. Born Albert Frederick Arthur George in 1895, he was never meant to reign. Shy, plagued by a stammer, he grew up in the shadow of his elder brother Edward, the confident heir. When Edward abdicated in 1936, scandal shook the monarchy, and Albert, reluctant, unprepared, became George VI. You remember the uncertainty of those first days, the doubt that clouded his ability to rule. Yet his reign became defined not by personal ease, but by endurance. His greatest test came with war. You recall the Blitz, when bombs turned London into a city of fire. George VI and Queen Elizabeth refused to flee, staying in Buckingham Palace even after it was bombed. They walked the ruins of East End neighborhoods, shook hands with survivors, listened to stories of loss. His halting speeches, carried on crackling radios, became lifelines. His stammer, once a source of humiliation, turned into proof of authenticity. Every word fought for, every syllable earned. He did not inspire by eloquence, but by perseverance. And yet, this steadying figure was mortal and flawed. His heavy smoking, his fragile health, his reliance on cigarettes to calm nerves, all left him vulnerable. You now see how his habits, hidden in plain sight, wrote the script of his early death. Coronary thrombosis, lung cancer, arteriosclerosis, diseases of a common man. Not a king. His reign ended not in glory, but in the quiet collapse of a body worn down by duty and addiction. The people mourned him deeply because they recognized themselves in him. He was not distant, not gilded in untouchable grandeur. He was fallible, and that fallibility made him beloved. He was the king who did not choose the crown but bore it. The man who struggled to speak but forced himself to do so. The sovereign who walked through rubble rather than retreat behind palace walls. His death at 56 was not simply the loss of a monarch. It was the closing of an era when Britain had survived by endurance rather than triumph. In the years to come, his legacy would be overshadowed by the extraordinary longevity of his daughter. Queen Elizabeth II's reign stretched across decades, her name written into the fabric of the 20th and 21st centuries. Yet beneath her long shadow, the memory of George VI remained, the quiet king who steadied the monarchy when it nearly fractured. His death in sleep, peaceful in appearance but rooted in relentless illness, marked the price of that steadiness. You reflect on the sensory fragments that endure. The smell of cigarette smoke clinging to palace curtains. The sight of his thin frame beneath regal robes. The sound of his cough echoing in hallways. The silence of his bedroom at Sandringham, where breath ceased in the early morning. These are not details of grandeur, but of humanity. They remind you that power cannot shield flesh from decay, nor can crowns protect against the corrosion of arteries. And yet, history is not written in flesh alone. George VI left behind a model of kingship defined not by charisma but by constancy. In times of fear, he remained. In times of doubt, he endured. His death, sudden yet inevitable, revealed the vulnerability behind monarchy. But his life revealed its strength, the ability of a single man, flawed and frightened, to steady a nation simply by standing with it. As you leave Windsor, you glance once more towards St. George's Chapel. Beneath its stone floors lies the king, sealed among his ancestors. Time has already begun to soften the details of his reign, but the essence remains. His daughter sits upon the throne. His people still remember his voice. His death at 56 is a reminder of mortality, his reign, a testament to duty. The frost melts from the lawns of Windsor. The bells fall silent. The world moves forward. But you, standing at the edge of his grave, carry the image of a king whose humanity defined him more than his crown. In the end, his legacy is not of grandeur, but of endurance, and that endurance remains, even as flesh and breath have long since faded. You walk once more through Sandringham in your memory, through the corridors where silence fell on the morning of February 6, 1952. The room where George VI died has long since been aired and rearranged. But its history cannot be erased. The impression of a body on a mattress, the clock hands frozen in recollection, the light that fell on his still face, these remain, etched into the fabric of the house, invisible but indelible. At Windsor, his coffin rests now in the vault of St. George's Chapel, a place that holds centuries of kings and queens. Stone encloses him, sealing away the fragile flesh that once bore a crown. Time strips all bodies down to dust, but here the memory of sovereignty lingers. Half sacred, half ordinary, you imagine the silence under those stones, where lineage becomes bone, where crowns rust into history. George VI's story is not of brilliance or glamour. It is a story of a man who never wanted the throne, but who bore it with stubborn dignity. His reign was not dazzling, but steady. In the face of Hitler's bombs, in the rubble of London streets, in the weary ration lines of a battered nation, he stood as a symbol of endurance. And in the end, his death was not the stuff of legend but of medicine: hardened arteries, cancerous lungs, a heart that simply could not go on. There is something profoundly human in that. Kings are dressed in robes and jewels, but beneath the trappings, they share the same frailties as their people. George VI smoked too much, worked too hard, feared too deeply, and like millions of others in his country, his body surrendered early. His people mourned him not because he was perfect, but because he was familiar, a man of duty, weighed down, yet still standing. As you step back from the vault, you reflect on what his death signified. The end of one reign, the rise of another, the hinge of history turning silently in a Norfolk bedroom. Elizabeth II's era would stretch far beyond her father's, reshaping Britain's identity, but always built upon the foundation he left. His steadiness gave her monarchy a platform, his death gave her crown its urgency. In the stillness of this memory, you feel the weight of a truth. Power cannot hold back death. Thrones cannot shield arteries. Crowns cannot cleanse lungs. Titles cannot buy time. In the end, George VI met the same fate as those he ruled. He fell asleep. And he did not wake. And perhaps that is why he is remembered with such tenderness. Not for grandeur, but for humanity. Not for brilliance, but for endurance. His legacy lingers in the quiet courage of a man who bore a crown he never wanted, who served until his body failed, and who slipped away without spectacle, leaving behind silence that stretched from Norfolk to Nairobi to every corner of an empire in mourning. You are left with a final image, a headstone, its letters softened by weather, a name already half swallowed by moss and time. Beneath it lies a king who lived as a man, who died as all men die, and whose memory reminds you that even in palaces, mortality waits patiently. The empire is gone, the war generation fades, but the truth remains. Power ends. Flesh fails. Only endurance echoes.